Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, I was in Drury yesterday with the Finance Minister Stephen Joyce, Minister Anne Tolley, also the mayors of our faster growing cities, Phil Goff from Auckland, Andrew King from Hamilton and Greg Brownless from Tauranga, to announce a new funding vehicle designed to speed up further major housing projects. Crown Infrastructure Partners will give local bodies access to new sources of funding for roading and water infrastructure necessary for housing developments. The company is being formed out of Crown Fibre Holdings, the company which has overseen the very successful rollout and commercial arrangements around ultra-fast broadband. It's been chosen because of its experience designing commercial partnerships between the Crown and non-government players, and in arrangements that involve the Crown taking some early stage risk in order to speed up infrastructure development. So Crown Infrastructure Partners will continue to oversee the rollout of ultra-fast broadband, but now also help to arrange finance for housing related infrastructure. The establishment of the company is another example of the growing levels of cooperation between central and local government. A few years ago, this level of cooperation would have been unlikely, but are going to be increasingly common. The establishment of Crown Infrastructure Partners follows the announcement just under 2 weeks ago that 5 of our faster growing councils would have infrastructure projects funded through the government's $1 billion Housing Infrastructure Fund. That funding, which has been announced and is now in place, will speed up the construction of 60,000 new homes over the next 10 years. However, more houses are needed. In high growth regions, a demand for new housing continues to outstrip the council's ability and willingness to take on further debt. This new vehicle will allow councils to access new sources of capital that are not counted against their debt limits. We announced yesterday the Crown will allocate $600 million of uncalled capital to the new financing vehicle, but we also expect it to attract investment from external investors, as happened with the rollout of ultra-fast broadband, where Chorus and a number of other companies invested alongside the Crown. In return for investing in these infrastructure assets, investors, which include the Crown, will receive a stream of revenue from developers and infrastructure users through targeted rates and volumetric charging. Overall, this will enable more homes to be built more quickly by ensuring that there is no funding constraint where infrastructure is needed. Councils will have the option of buying back the infrastructure at some point in the future, but won't have to do so. And I want to acknowledge the support and the work done by the mayors who attended the launch yesterday to achieve this next step in expanding our housing supply and more appropriately funding our infrastructure. Tomorrow, as you know, Foreign Affairs Minister Jerry Brownlee and I will be meeting with British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. It will be a chance to reaffirm our close historical relationship with the UK, to update ourselves on the challenges of Brexit, and we are anticipating a wide-ranging and interesting discussion. This week in the House, the government will look to make progress on the appropriation estimates bill. Wednesday the 26th will be a Members' Day. I'm in Wellington most of the week, although on Wednesday afternoon I will be missing question time to go to watch the St Pat's Town versus Silverstream first 15 game. In my capacity as a father, not a Prime Minister, with my son captaining one team against the team I used to play for. I'll be around Parliament on Wednesday morning through attending Cabinet committees, and we'll find a few minutes to come and talk to you because I'll miss the question time run. On Thursday I'll go to Auckland for the day, and on Friday I'll be in Timaru and Ashburton. Any questions?
Will you be raising the rights of New Zealanders living in the UK when you meet with Boris Johnson tomorrow?
Well, I think more particularly we'll just indicate our ongoing interest in improving rights of New Zealanders to be able to work in the UK. I think we should be practical about our expectations of movement in the shorter term because they have to deal with the fairly big challenges of how they deal with citizenship and access rights in their exit from the EU. But we want to make sure we keep the issue in front of them.
Are you concerned about how Kiwis are being treated there and that some of those rights might be lost?
Well, we can keep an eye on it. Remember, this is going to be a discussion that won't include us. It'll be between the UK government and the European Union, and they've got a very large number of issues to canvass. So we will be indicating our ongoing interest in it. I would expect that once, like the free trade discussion, once Britain has left the European Union, then they'll be in a better position to deal with us.
Is it fair, do you think, for them to charge Kiwis $440 as a health surcharge for those who are staying longer than 6 months?
Well, look, they have a range of charges related to, applications for citizenship and visas and residency and so on. It's up to them to set their charges. We set ours, they set theirs. Our primary focus is on being able to maintain and improve access.
The key difference, though, is that ours for them is $0 and theirs for us is $440.
Yeah.
Isn't that a bit unfair?
Well, look, I'm sure we can have that discussion, but it's I doubt that it's very high on their priority list. And I think, as I said, we've got to be realistic about the position Britain is in as it embarks just in the last few weeks on its negotiations with the European Union.
So what will you say to Boris about it? I mean, what are your personal thoughts on the rights of New Zealanders over there and his government clamping down on them?
Oh, we will just make sure he's aware of our ongoing interest in the maintaining and improving access of New Zealanders to the UK, and he's someone who's indicated in the past his interest in that issue. Again, I think we have to be realistic about the size and complexity of the issues they are dealing with, and that ours aren't going to be major in the short term in that context.
Do you think there could be further erosion of New Zealanders' rights, even as an unintended consequence of some of those Brexit negotiations?
Look, it's hard to speculate about that because they are now having and will continue to have a pretty intensive discussion about the rights of European citizens in the UK and UK citizens in Europe, and I don't think anyone's quite clear about where that's going to come out, let alone what the unintended consequences of it might be.
In terms of the free trade deal, how much of that will you be discussing tomorrow?
Oh, look, that's a matter for the discussions, but both governments have signalled a strong interest in a free trade agreement, but of course we can't begin that process until they've exited Europe. In the meantime, we've got a pretty high priority, which is to negotiate a free trade agreement with Europe, which, as it stands at the moment, includes the UK. So we've just got to keep things in the right order.
How high would New Zealand be on the priority list for the UK when they're negotiating an FTA?
Well, I think in the same way we've been able to be a priority for other large economies, we aren't as economically significant as others, but we're easier to deal with. And we would be, I think, want to encourage the view that if the UK needs to be able to establish early its ability to do free trade agreements, then New Zealand is a candidate for that. They'll make their own decisions about trading that off against what will no doubt be a pretty busy schedule of agreements with larger economies.
How far away realistically are you talking about for a free trade agreement with Britain? I mean, presumably a couple of years before they exit, Europe and then a couple more years after that at least, I would think.
Well, you know, your guess is as good as mine, really. It's we would advocate that for an early start with a country that's easy to deal with. They've still got some way to go to get to the point where they can even contemplate those discussions.
Looking at the
Preamble,
possible
you said
stumbling
it's-
blocks, do Welsh farmers have anything to fear from an FTA between New Zealand and the UK?
Look, I wouldn't want to comment on it in detail, but I would imagine that there'll be a lot of the same sort of issues that apply whenever New Zealand goes to negotiate free trade agreements, and that is that agriculture is a pretty important part of it and sometimes a pretty challenging part of it.
You said that the discussions you're going to have are going to be wide-ranging, but you also said interesting and had a bit of a chuckle. What do you mean by that?
Oh, well, I think we're all familiar with the Foreign Secretary's eloquence.
Can you
So you're looking forward to having him in a room with Jerry Brownlee, eh?
Well, it'd be good to listen to for a while, wouldn't it? Okay, any other questions?
He sometimes says a few politically incorrect things, and he compared a hongi today with a headbutt. Do you think any in New Zealand would take offence at that?
No, I don't think so. I think we need to bear in mind that a hongi is a fairly unfamiliar ritual to almost anyone else in the world. It's pretty unique here, and sometimes people don't exactly understand what it's about.
Just on the immigration policy, you made noises this morning that you might be rowing back on some of the ideas that you guys put out a few months ago. Can you just explain what exactly you're thinking of not doing? So is it around the 48,000 cap?
Well, look, the details will be clear when a final decision's announced. But we put out a proposition around the essential skills visas, changes in the parameters there, and we put them out deliberately for consultation. There's been a response to that, which we're listening to, and it's come from across the board, from employers and business and employees actually, and migrants, and so we'll be taking that into account. But you wouldn't be looking at wholesale change, we'd just look at changing some of the parameters.
So would you reduce that salary band, would you?
Well, as I said, we'll look at changing some of the parameters, but you'll have to wait and see where our considerations get to. I mean, we've got the submissions, they're being looked at.
Could we see targeted salary bands to the regions, say to Auckland, higher in Auckland, lower in Southland? Is that an option?
Look, I wouldn't comment on the particular parameters, but I would make this point that in an economy that's producing 10,000 new jobs a month, that demand for skills applies right across the country, Auckland and in the regions. And I think the extent of it in the regions, the strength of that demand is surprising some people. But equally in Auckland, if we're going to build the 35,000 houses the government said it's going to build, a proportion of the 60,000 houses enabled by the Housing Infrastructure Fund, the thousands more that will be enabled by Crown Infrastructure Partners, we're going to need people in Auckland to do it. So they're not an exception to the demand. They're part of the strong demand for skills.
So why not let the market decide here by having employers increase their wages to attract staff and change their systems, invest in R&D to try and improve their productivity of those staff and therefore justify the higher wages?
And I think you see that happening in parts, particularly in the construction industry, where there's a lot of discussion now about how to deal with the fact that there's so much work, there's such a long pipeline, and it's so strong, and the opportunities to do just the things that you've said.
Surely these people, you'd expect them to be paid more than $48,000 a year though, because they're in industries for which there's a lot of demand for. So why would you need to look at changing that wage cap?
Well, as I said, we'll just have to wait and see just what decisions is, because the decisions haven't been made. But we're listening to the feedback.
And were the main concerns that people didn't want to pay their workers that much money? Was that the main concern?
Oh no, look, the main concern has been people being able to, or businesses and regions being able to get the people they need to do the work that's available. And I think all pretty well, all the politicians have had that message, including Mr. Peters.
But surely they'd have a better chance of attracting those people if they had to pay them more.
That's right, and they've got to take that into account, and that's part of the balance we're trying to achieve here, is getting the skills we need for the jobs that are available, making sure that New Zealanders have appropriate opportunities for jobs they could be getting, because we have a strong interest in that, and not being in the position where our industries find themselves becoming completely reliant. Now, I must say there's been a good discussion over the last 12 or 18 months with a number of our industries, particularly horticulture, but hospitality coming to it as well, where they need to understand it's not the government's job to go and procure their workforce. It's their job.
But if you're going to let them off to just keep going ahead with the status quo, then how could you expect change to come through?
Well, it's not a matter of letting them off. I mean, we're doing both, making sure that, remember this discussion has come about because we've been trying to get the mix of skills differently. That was the core of the propositions in April. So that was a change in proposing to change the status quo. And alongside that, we're having increasingly constructive discussions with these industries about make sure they don't become reliant on government policy to supply their workforce.
But you seem to not be changing government policy once they cried foul. Like you put out a set of proposals, they've said they don't want them. You've indicated you're going to row back on those proposals. So it seems like they're concerned with having to pay workers more and also maybe spend more for training local workers. So why not initiate the proposals that you put up a few months ago?
Well, we have, and the outcome won't be the one that you're describing.
So of those submissions, those 170 odd submissions the government received, how many of those address the issue that salary band's being increased?
Oh, look, I couldn't give you detail about that.
Was it the majority though? Was the issue around the pay?
Look, honestly, I couldn't give you detail about that, but the general level of feedback has been pretty straightforward.
So what's the time frame for a decision on this?
Oh, the next few weeks.
Using your argument that the huge increase in immigration is down to Kiwis coming home and staying home, why then do they need overseas workers so much if there are those Kiwis coming home?
Well, the key element of that argument is Kiwis not leaving, actually. So in the last 5 years, there's been estimated that about 150,000 Kiwis have stayed home who 5 years ago we probably thought would have left. The fact is the economy's growing, the demand for skills continues to grow. We've already talked about construction and infrastructure. That's just one industry where that demand looks like it's going to be strong for some time. And other industries have made, I think through their public statements, made it clear that they think that they've got very strong demand too, whether it's trucking or horticulture or agriculture or hospitality. Aged care is another one. So we do have. These are real services that have to be provided. Actually, next week, the week after next year. So we've got to have to take into account those issues.
Those industries that you've mentioned are traditionally quite low-paid industries, though. So why let them away with that, I guess?
Well, I think we've already had some of that discussion. It's not a matter of letting people away with it. It's a matter of making sure that we've got the people to do the work that has to be done. Like you have to service the tourists, you have to build the houses, you have to look after the old people. There's no choice about that. And working with the industries to make sure that they are adapting to the situation. And the point I'm making is that they seem to me to be getting significantly more constructive about that.
So when you developed your proposals, did you not expect the blowback from it? Did you think that businesses and so forth would accept those changes?
Well, there's some new aspects of the rules, and that's why we put them out for consultation, because you can, when you're doing the policy, you can make some assumptions, but you have to test those. And I think the strong demand for skills in the economy has continued. It's particularly in our regions, it's remained strong, and that's what's reflected in the discussion.
Do you know whether Todd Barclay will be at Parliament tomorrow?
My understanding is that he will be.
Will he be here for the full sitting week?
I couldn't comment on that.
Do you expect that he'll attend select committee meeting?
I can't comment on that.
Have
That's a matter for the week.
Have you given another police statement, or have police asked you for another statement?
I'm not making any further comment on that.
Do you
Does
say
the
yes or no?
Does the government have any plan or response to the death of 7 people to synthetic cannabis as reported last week?
Well, I think simply to emphasise really two things. One is that these are illegal drugs, and people should expect firm policing of the law. And second thing is that these are tragedies. These are young people who must have believed they were taking some harmless or recreational drug. And if it's found that synthetic cannabis is the cause of their deaths, which seems likely, then that's a real tragedy. They had no idea what they were doing. And people should listen to the health warnings about these substances. They can be lethal.
What are you doing to find the source of it?
Well, that's a matter. This is an illegal drug, and that's a matter for the police. And if they're seeing, a significant number of deaths like that, that's a very significant policing issue.
Doesn't this level of harm, 7 deaths, 20 hospitalisations a day, require something over and above business as usual?
Well, I don't think it's business as usual. I mean, you need to talk to the police about how operationally they're dealing with their aspect of, policing the sale and distribution of these drugs. But the most important thing is that people who are considering taking recreational synthetic cannabis have to be aware it could kill them. It's not a harmless recreational drug. This could kill them. They've seen the pictures on TV, and it's worse on social media. They need to understand that. Don't take the substances. We don't know what's in them. It's illegal, but also it's potentially lethal.
Well, isn't it important to find the source to prevent perhaps another 7 deaths in the next fortnight? I mean, how urgently are you actually taking this?
Well, again, that is a matter for police. I mean, they need a set of legal powers to investigate and take action. Only the police have those powers, and they, have indicated, I think, shown previously that where they see a priority for policing, they're able to move resource to it. It's up to them to make that decision about how they do so.
You talked yesterday about arresting people rather than, ideas like offering an amnesty to people to come forward to actually identify the source.
Well, look, if there's, again, we don't run the police force. It's an illegal drug. They make the operational decisions. They've indicated where they see priorities. They're able to shift their resources to police more effectively and more aggressively. And we would expect that if this does turn out to be a rising death toll, that would be taken very seriously.
So do you ask for any advice on it at all?
I've asked for advice about what action is feasible to be taken, and that falls into those two categories. And that is, it's an illegal drug. It has to be policed. We are not the police force. They have to be able to deal with it. The most important thing here, though, is that people do not take these illegal substances that can kill them. That sense of personal responsibility is pretty critical to staying alive. They need to decide they're not going to take these drugs. They're not harmless recreational substances. They are potentially lethal because no one knows what's in them.
So are you stepping up the educational campaign along those lines?
Well, that would be possible. We haven't made a decision to do that yet.
Isn't this what you were
I would have thought the pictures in the media were pretty educational.
Isn't this what you were warned about, though, when you banned legal highs, that this would go underground and there'd be a black market where people are putting horse tranquilizer on synthetic cannabis? Isn't this what you were warned about?
Well, there was, as you may remember, extensive public discussion at the time because the ban followed on from the alternative policy, which was to make them publicly available in a regulated form. And it turned out that was both not practical, because they could keep changing the makeup of the drugs, and unacceptable to the public. You may recall that. So we've been through a whole cycle of policy to try and get this right. In the end, we have two tools right now. One is young people deciding not to take a drug that can kill them, can't emphasise that enough. They have a sense of respect. They should have this sufficient sense of self-preservation to be very, very careful, and the capacity for assertive policing around the sale and distribution of the drugs.
So do you think you've got the policy right now after going through those policy steps?
Well, if it is the case that there's been 7 deaths and a large number of hospitalisations, that's a tragedy. We have tried our best on policy over 6 or 7 years with different versions to try and get it right. As we pointed out, the readily available public sale of them turned out to be impractical and unacceptable to the public. Now those drugs are meant to be clinically proven before they're approved, and if they're approved they can then be sold. None have been clinically tested. But we've got a more urgent problem, which is there's clearly pills out on the street which are lethal, and young people should stay well away from them.
So the rise of that problem, does that indicate the police haven't been doing their job?
No, I wouldn't necessarily. I wouldn't assert that. I think these, things change in the world that the police are dealing with. Sometimes when something's a problem, it becomes less so. There's less aggravated robberies going on in South Auckland, partly because of assertive policing and support for the shop owners. This is just another different source of criminal activity that they have to deal with.
But it's not hard to find that we went down Queen Street and found a handful of people who were high on these drugs and talked about it happily. So it's not like they're hard to find. It's not like it's hidden. They're just wandering the streets on Queen Street.
Well, I hope you referred the ease of finding it to the police, because we would expect them to deal with that.
Well, we broadcast it on the 6 o'clock news. Shouldn't they have seen that and just gone for a while?
Well, I suggest you take those matters up with the police. I mean, this is not a particularly useful discussion because we don't run the police force.
Has anyone applied for their products to be tested so they could be legalised? Is it that no one's applied, or they've applied and the products aren't acceptable?
As far as I understand, no one's applied.
One of the problems is that the government outlawed animal testing, so that made it hard to get a rigorous test. Is there any room for relaxing that to essentially allow these low-risk products to get on the market and replace them with the black market?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting policy idea. At the time, there was a great deal of pressure to ban animal testing, and so the Parliament listened to that and banned animal testing, which does make it pretty reasonably challenging to be able to get the drugs tested.
Isn't it about alternative ways of testing?
At the time, I can't recall all the advice, but at the time there was indications that there may be, but it wouldn't be easy.
There's an argument that if you were to legalise or decriminalise cannabis, that more people would be smoking that instead. Does this change your view on that in any way?
No, it doesn't. I don't see why it would. I mean, these are dangerous products in their own right, and people should be very careful with them.
The rich list came out this morning, and it showed that the collective wealth of everybody on that list was over $80 billion, essentially showing the rich in New Zealand are getting richer. Does this show that inequality in New Zealand is on the rise?
No, it doesn't. The government reports regularly on trends in income and inequality in New Zealand. I think will be another report out pretty soon. The trend has been that while inequality rose in the late 80s and early 90s, and since then it's been roughly flat to falling.
But that's income inequality, not wealth equality.
That's right, it is income inequality.
So the question
You'd
is
have to look through about whether about the wealth inequality. I don't think there's much doubt that if you look at what's happened with interest rates over the last 8 or 10 years, going back to 2008, much lower interest rates drives up capital values. It wouldn't be surprising that people who hold assets are going to find those assets are more valuable. If interest rates rise, then on that measure of inequality will drop. They'll still have the same assets. So it's a tricky area, but I don't think there's any doubt that from people who bought a house in 2009 to those who owned a bunch of shares on Wall Street, those values have all gone up, and one of the big drivers has been low interest rates.
On the infrastructure fund announced yesterday, do you think that the targeted rates used to fund them will reduce land values? Because in theory it should be capitalised into the land values.
Quite possibly. I mean, there was a report came out from Subaru the other day showing that around half, well, that land had a premium of over 50% on it due to regulation, land price. So I would expect that looking ahead, if the policies are right, then you will tend to see land being less expensive, but there being a bit more paid for marginal infrastructure. Now overall, whether that means the overall price of housing stays the same or goes down, I think yet to be seen. But clearly better regulation of our land markets and more competitive land markets are going to tend to take the pressure off the price of land. And this fund, or this vehicle alongside the Housing Infrastructure Fund, are important elements in creating more competitive land markets, which would, in time, with better regulation, lead to, on average, lower land prices.
So don't you need to have significantly lower land prices, though, to be able to actually get housing costs down? Because these targeted rates will be an extra cost per year on the homeowner, quite a significant extra cost.
Well, that's what we're going to be testing, but these are, I think, steps in the right direction. But the magnitude of those effects, I think, is yet to be seen.
So how much bigger does the fund need to be to cope with the infrastructure demands, which look a lot bigger than 600 million or whatever the leverage version might be?
Well, I think we'll get to test that as the market realises there's greater availability of finance, and that the usual bottlenecks, such as council debt ceilings, which have helped underpin higher land prices, are gradually being freed up. So we'll see what the magnitude of those effects are.
What do you make of New Zealand First plans around updating the Boxing and Wrestling Act to allow police to have the power to stop events like what happened at the weekend?
Well, it's probably a bottom line, along with the other ones. So
do you think
I haven't given much thought to it, to be honest.
Do you think those sorts of events where you have a number of gangs coming together in a town and boxing the hell out of each other is a good idea?
Look, I think the more important thing for the gangs is to stop manufacturing meth that wrecks lives and to take better care of their children and their women. That's what they should focus on.
Just one further point about the Boris Johnson meeting. Will you be talking to him at all about the Conservative Party's appetite for a change of leadership?
No, I don't think so.
What specific things will you raise with them about Kiwis in the UK?
As I said, we'll just be making sure that the Foreign Secretary is aware of our ongoing interest in improving access for Kiwis to the UK. And again, I'd stress, we're practical, we understand the pressures they are under over the next few years to deal with very significant issues for their own citizens and European citizens, and we would expect that when the time comes, we're able to talk to them directly in detail about our requirements or our interests.
What specific interests are they? Sorry, what specific interests are they that you're talking about?
Well, I'm not going to be any more specific than I've been.
There's
The
been another
prospects
huge
of Gareth Morgan perhaps running an EPSA, does that worry you or alter your outlook for how you might deal with ACT in that electorate?
Not particularly.
Do you think
I don't think it matters much. I don't think it matters much where Gareth runs. I mean, he's presumably chasing party vote and seems to be creating a bit of pressure for the Greens and Labor in that process.
Do you think he could beat David Seymour in Epsom?
Look, it's just speculation. He hasn't even decided to stand there, as I understand it.
There's been another slip in the Manawatu Gorge about the same size as the last one. Will that road ever reopen?
Well, that's yet to be seen. I think in the meantime, it's pretty important that we build confidence in the interregional route there. So I'm advised NZTA have taken over the maintenance of the saddle road from the council because that is going, for at least the foreseeable future, that's going to be the main route, and it needs good maintenance and upgrade. So we're keen to make sure that the access is there and that people who may have been reliant on the gorge have got an alternative option, because the gorge problem does look pretty considerable.
Would the government consider giving any assistance to businesses that are affected by its closure?
Well, look, we're always open to listening to them. The Saddle Road route goes through Woodville. I understand people in Ashurst are worried about the heavy traffic going through their small town there too. There'll be some things that can be done to mitigate those, but the route services those towns, and we just want to make sure the route's of sufficient quality to handle the volume of traffic that's going to be on it.
Your MP, Alistair Scott, told a public meeting that the government wouldn't be offering them a support package. Is that true?
Where is this, sorry?
Alistair Scott said that at a public meeting.
In
I'm not too sure where it was.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be assuming a support package. As I say, we're happy to listen to what businesses have to say. If there's a route there that's taking traffic through the towns, the case for support wouldn't be very strong, I wouldn't think.
But, I mean, it's an act of God, really, just like the earthquake, just like floods. We've rolled out packages of support for businesses in Kokoda, each given a life. Why not here, where essentially it's an act of God that's prevented you from getting business?
Well, as I said, happy to listen to whatever it is the businesses have to say. I'll have to say in the other cases, the impact has been pretty definitive in that the businesses were closed. In the case of Kaikoura, indefinitely so. We'll work on the access route, because the ideal here is that the Saddle Road is in an acceptable state, that the traffic is unaffected and the traffic through those towns is maintained in a way that'll assist the businesses.
Is it appropriate in an election year, do you think, to skip question time? You go see your son's rugby match?
Well, it's, sometimes as a parent you have to make decisions that trade off your different obligations, and I've made the decision in this case. There's good reasons for it.
Who would you be rooting for?
Obviously, Patstown.
Which son is it that's the captain?
Oh, my youngest one.
Is it
Yep.
Bart? No.
No, Xavier.
Xavier,
Yep.
okay. And who does he play for?
His team?
That's it, yes.
St. Pax's team.
Yes, I played for the Silver Street First 15. Okay, thank you very much.
There's been, sorry, just very quickly, there's been a letter signed by hundreds of GPs calling for extra funding to train more GPs. They want to train 120 more a year. Would government look at funding that?
Oh, look, all that's under discussion, and these various proposals have been floating around about how to get more rural GPs. As I understand it, officials have been looking at propositions from Waikato University, Otago and Auckland University.
What's your view on that Waikato University idea? Apparently it's $250 million extra to do it.
It's going through a process, and when we get some advice, we'll let you know. Okay, thank you.